Let's talk about Gravity Falls Season 2, Episode 11 and Episode 12, Not What He Seems and A Tale of Two Stands. I want to get it out there right away that I am super happy that I let you guys convince me to live stream my reaction to the episode Not What He Seems. I'm not really a big live reaction kind of guy, but that episode definitely called for a live reaction. And to the rest of you guys, in case you missed it, I did live stream my reaction to the episode Not What He Seems last Sunday. The archived recording of that live stream is up on my channel right now if you guys want to go watch it. There's also a test stream earlier in the day, and in both of them I actually do answer quite a few questions from the chat. So if you're interested in seeing the live reaction or just seeing some Q&A, definitely check those out. That said, let's talk about these two episodes, and there's not actually a whole lot to say plot-wise. My review is mostly going to focus on just a few details, so let's get the plot out of the way right away. On the brink of Stan finally being able to turn the machine on, the government guys that we saw back in Karaoke show up again and take him into custody. He stole radioactive waste to power the machine, which probably wasn't a good idea. And they also suspect that he has something to do with the gravity anomalies that the machine is causing. And as it turns out, he has multiple fake identities. This leads Dipper and Mabel to start trying to uncover the truth, hopefully to clear his name, but obviously that doesn't end up happening. And their search culminates in them finding the code to the secret vending machine door and the lab underneath the Mystery Shack. They bump into Seuss on the way and he ends up going down into the lab with them. They find the machine, and Dipper wants to turn it off, but Mabel is more trusting of Stan. She still believes in him despite everything they've learned. So despite the fact that there are all kinds of warnings in the journals, man, Dipper was shaken up when he saw all those journals in one place. Holy crap. Despite the fact that there's all kinds of warnings in the journals about turning this machine on, because Mabel trusts Stan, when Stan shows up and asks her not to turn the machine off and she's the only one in a position to turn it off, she doesn't. The Mystery Shack is destroyed again, and out of the machine walks Stan's twin brother, who used to live in the Mystery Shack, was lost through the machine, who Stan has been trying to get back by turning the machine on, and who is the author of the journals. Man, why didn't I watch this show first run, and why wasn't I theorizing about it back then? Stan's brother, despite looking very, very similar, is immediately very different from Stan. He's not as bulky or brutish, and yet he is shown to be able to take care of himself, but there's an air of sophistication to the guy. And of course, he had to be smart enough to create all of the things that the author created. So we already know he's a freaking genius. It was really cool to see how this show could take the animation style that we're used to and the character designs that we're used to and create a character who is so physically similar to Stan and yet immediately so radically and noticeably different. So that was already a treat. And it was this big reveal at the end of Not What He Seems that was the highlight of these two episodes. What followed in The Tale of Two Stans was mostly just exposition. It was the backstory of the two Stans' lives. Turns out that when they were young, they were inseparable because I'm going to call them Stan and Ford, Ford being the brother. Stan was tough but not very smart, and Ford was smart but not very tough. They really only had each other and made plans to go adventuring with one another one day. But as they grew up, it turns out that as tough as Stan is, he's not as tough as Ford is smart. Ford is a certifiable genius, like build super weapons in the basement kind of genius. I would even go so far as to say that he's Jimmy Neutron levels of genius, and that's saying something. He's invited to go to a prestigious college to pursue his ideas. This puts him at odds with Stan, who accidentally destroys the experiment that he was going to use to get into the college and loses him that opportunity. Their very strict father then kicks Stan out of the house. Side note, I really hope we get to see that guy again because holy crap, I hated him, and because of that, I really want to know more about him, if that makes any sense. Stan ends up wandering the United States trying to make a name for himself as a salesman. That's where all of his alternate identities come from. Basically, he kept screwing people over to the point that he was run out of town and had to change his name. Still kind of nefarious, but not nefarious in the same way that we thought. And eventually he does reunite with Ford. Ford has gone to Gravity Falls, a place where he has determined the border between dimensions is the weakest. That's how all the weird stuff is able to appear there. He wants to find a way to travel to another dimension. And so he builds the machine there on that spot, and he builds his house, which would eventually become the Mystery Shack, over top of it. But after his assistant, McGucket, passes very, very briefly through the portal in the machine and comes back warning of some horrible doom that will befall all of them if the machine is turned back on, McGucket leaves and Ford starts to hear a voice. And I definitely think it was Bill Cipher. Because when he finally reunites with Stan after inviting him there, he immediately checks Stan's eyes. And if you remember back when Dipper was possessed by Bill, he had different eyes. And then in a complete 180 from his attitude in the previous scene with McGucket, he wants nothing to do with his research and he asks Stan to take the journals and hide them. They get into a big argument, which leads to the machine being accidentally turned on and Ford accidentally being pushed through. And now we know what happened to Ford and why Stan has been working so hard to get this machine operational again. I loved Not What He Seems. It was so fast-paced, leading up to the reveal and yet still had some time to slow down and really let everything soak in just before the big wham scene. It was very well paced, very well written. Like, we were supposed to doubt Stan here, just as Dipper was doubting Stan. And while I definitely wanted to see what the machine would do when the time finally came, I definitely didn't want them to turn the machine off. But this episode did do a pretty good job of making it seem like Stan could be a bad guy. When they find out about the false identities, they even start to question whether or not he's actually their uncle, or grunkle, or whatever. And that was really effective, and the episode took its time to really let that soak in and let you feel it along with the characters. I also want to make note for like the umpteenth time that this show is really good at using humor. Its jokes are quick and sharp and subtle, and typically they always land. Like, there was a little bit of humor in The Tale of Two Stans, not a lot, but a little bit, and most of that felt a little out of place, but episodes like that are the exception. In Not What He Seems, for example, in some of the tensest scenes of what might be the most tense episode of the show so far, were just these little injections of humor that were just disarming enough to make you laugh without actually taking you out of the drama of the moment, and that's really hard to write. Kudos to this crew. And while A Tale of Two Stans was in no way bad, I definitely agree with what a lot of you guys were saying in the chat during the live stream, that A Tale of Two Stans is a much inferior episode. It's mostly exposition, and honestly, I didn't like some of the choices they went with in the story. I'm sure I'm gonna end up being fine with most of it, but man, I just reached a point where I started to like Stan a lot, and now you're telling me that he did literally nothing to build this machine, he didn't contribute anything to the research of the weirdness in the town. I assume that he must have helped with a little bit of it because he seemed to know a lot about it. And I was thinking maybe he built this machine trying to replicate another machine that his brother fell through years ago. I mean, looking back, that's kind of silly because Stan isn't really that smart. But I guess I had it in my head that he had achieved some stuff, and then suddenly I'm told that he didn't, and it was a bit of a shock. And now Ford comes through and he's shown to be able to fight now. Stan used to be the one who protected Ford. What purpose does Stan serve now? If Ford is a super genius who also can fight really, really good. Like, I'm sure the story's not going to make Stan obsolete, but it kind of felt like that's the direction it was going with this episode. Like, Stan definitely seems to be more concerned with the kids than Ford is, so maybe he'll be relegated more to just protecting the kids specifically. That's kind of a letdown. So much of Stan's character was the mystery that was built up around him, and when we finally got to see what the answer to that mystery was, so little of it had to do with him and so much of it had to do with his brother. I just feel like they could have balanced it out a little bit better to keep Stan interesting going forward. It's also clear now that when Bill recognized the name Stan, he wasn't thinking of this Stan, he was thinking of Ford, which I also find disappointing. I was hoping at the very least Stan had had some confrontations with Bill or something. After all, he did say that Dipper reminds him of himself, and Dipper seems to be kind of becoming Bill's nemesis. So I just made the assumption, and now it doesn't seem like he ever did. I really trust the writers of this show. It's a very good show, it's a very well-written show, so I trust, as I said, that they're not going to make Stan obsolete. I just don't know how that's going to work yet. And it's got me just a tad concerned. But then there was also plenty good in A Tale of Two Stans. Seeing the bond between the two brothers was really great. Dipper and Mabel later questioned whether or not their bond was going to survive growing older because their bond is very reminiscent of the bond between the two Stans, and the two of them had a falling out. Getting to see Ford use pre-established technology from an earlier episode to get rid of the government guys was really neat, and gave us a good idea of what he might bring to the weekly formula of the show. The boat that they were going to sail around the world in when they were young and planned to be adventurers was the Stan of War, which is also the name of the boat that Stan took out on the lake in Legend of the Jabberwocky or whatever that episode was called. That was a really nice touch. And I really liked seeing at the very end when the two Stans finally talk with no one else in the room. They're very hostile towards each other, but it's also very clear that they both want to reconcile. And they're both just too proud to say it yet. Because despite all their differences, they're also very similar. They're both very stubborn. They're both very proud. And it's going to be very interesting to see these two characters interacting going forward. Overall, despite a few concerns, these two episodes were great. This is a turning point for the series, and I have heard some of you guys saying that the series goes downhill from here. You seem to be in a minority compared to the others, but it has been said. I have heard it said. And I'm really curious to see which side of the fence I'm on once I finish the show. All of that said though, guys, if you have seen these episodes, what did you think of them? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys